Hi, I'm Lynne Golodner, and you're listening to the Make Meaning podcast. I'm a former journalist and the author of 9 books, a writing coach, and a marketing expert. In this show, I interview authors and people in publishing about how they find inspiration, how they build their brands and choose their publishing paths, and most of all, how they find meaning in the mundane. If you want to learn more about how to get your writing career off the ground, visit my website, lynnegolodner.com, and check out the classes, programs, and retreats that I offer. And if you like what you hear, please give us a 5-star review at Apple Podcasts or on any podcast platform where you find the Make Meaning podcast. I hope these stories give you the courage and confidence to make your writing dreams come true. Thanks for listening. Patrick Hicks was a guest on this podcast in 2021, and we talked then about his writing routine, his many books, his work as a professor in South Dakota, and his identity as a dual citizen of Ireland and America. We also talked about his fascination with writing about the Holocaust when he has no personal connection to that horrible time in the history of humanity. Now, I'm thrilled to invite Patrick back to the Make Meaning podcast to talk about his latest book, Across the Lake, a chilling, brutal, and beautiful story about the only all-female concentration camp during the Holocaust, Ravensbrück. Patrick is the author of more than 10 books. He's been nominated 7 times for the Pushcart Prize. He was a finalist for the High Plains Book Award. And his poetry has appeared on NPR, the PBS NewsHour, and American Life in Poetry. He has lived in Northern Ireland, England, Germany, and Spain, but now calls the Midwestern United States home. When not writing, he enjoys watching thunderstorms roll across the prairie with his British wife, and he is a sucker for playing in the backyard with his son, who was adopted from South Korea. I'm excited to welcome Patrick Hicks back to the Make Meaning podcast. Well, Patrick Hicks, welcome back to the Make Meaning podcast.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be back. Thank you so much for having me.
So, very few people return to this podcast as repeat guests, and I'm delighted that you're one of them. I've loved watching your career flow and grow on social media over the last several years since we first met, and I'm excited to talk with you today about your newest book, Across the Lake. So let's start there. Tell me, what was the inspiration for this book?
Oh, yeah. There are a number of points of inspiration for the book, but I suppose this is now my 3rd Holocaust novel, and about halfway through my 2nd novel about the Holocaust, In the Shadow of Dora, I began to realize that I was writing mostly about the male experience of the Holocaust, and I just happened to be in Berlin doing some research. So I went up to Ravensbrück, the only all-female concentration camp in the Third Reich, to pay my respects to those that were murdered and to walk the grounds so that I could just know the place a little better. And while I was walking around Ravensbrück, it occurred to me that I wasn't aware of that many books that talked about the Holocaust from the female perspective. Mm-hmm. And while I was there, the idea for this novel kind of presented itself to me. And I started with a simple question. Did women act differently in the concentration camps than men? And as I did more and more research, I found out that is indeed the case, that women, by and large, at Ravensbrück did act differently than their male counterparts at other camps.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I actually, being raised Jewish and so aware of the Holocaust and having lots of education about it, meeting survivors in my life, I don't think I had ever heard about Ravensbrück. And so I was really intrigued by the premise of your book. And we did speak before a few years ago when you were on the podcast about why you're attracted to writing about the Holocaust. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about why this period of history and humanity fascinates you so much, and what you hope to do in your novels when you're writing about this terrible time.
Yeah, it's unusual to have an Irish Catholic guy from Minnesota writing about the Holocaust. But when I was really young, in the 1970s, I remember watching a documentary, it must have been on PBS, about the film footage that was taken at Bergen-Belsen. And the shock and injustice of that has never really left me. And for me as a writer, there's no greater story of injustice than what happened to the Jews of Europe and the other victims that got caught up in that undertow as well, Polish people and Jehovah's Witnesses and whatnot. So I have, ever since I was a teenager, I'd been doing research on the Holocaust, but it wasn't really until maybe the last 15 years that I took a a really deep dive as far as research is concerned. Someone asked me a while ago how many camps I have done research at, and I think the number is 12. And I've talked to a number of survivors. And I'll always say that the memoirs of the survivors are far more important than the books that I'm writing. But I hope that maybe I can sort of add to the conversation and get people thinking about this incredibly horrible event in maybe in ways they hadn't thought of before.
Yeah. Started with that question of, how did it change through a lens of gender? And how did you sort of build the story? So you did your research, and it's a fascinating question, and I want to hear more about that too. But tell me how the story came to be, how you developed the characters, and what that vision was like for you.
I approached it with the idea of I wanted the reader to close across the lake and I wanted the reader to ask questions of themselves, like, how does gender operate in the Holocaust, and how does violence and gender operate?
Yeah.
So there's that. That was really central to what I wanted the reader to sort of take away from the novel. But purely as a writer, and you know this, you're a writer yourself, there were certain craft things that I wanted to challenge myself with. I mean, I'm a guy, and I knew that if I was going to write this, something like 90% of my characters were going to be women. So I was attracted to that challenge. And I'd never written what's called a braided narrative before, because in Across the Lake, the first chapter is from the perspective of Anna. She's an Aufseherin. She's a female Nazi guard at Ravensbrück. And then chapter 2 takes place in the mind of Svea, who is a prisoner, and it oscillates back and forth between the two of them. And the reader sort of is above the two characters, and the reader can see things that these two characters don't know about each other. So from a craft perspective, as a writer, I was really intrigued by the challenge. I wondered if I could pull it off.
Isn't that fun? It's really fun to do that. Yeah. It's really interesting. And how long did the project take you, both the research and then the writing and all of that?
The first time I went to Ravensbrück was 2019. And, when I went there, I had no idea that I was going to write about it. But on the train ride back to Berlin, that's when I was thinking, I should really write about this, because I've really spent a lot of time studying the Holocaust, and I didn't know much about Ravensbrück. And I thought maybe I can bring that to light. So I guess it's been 4 years in the making, and I don't know, went through 7 or 8 drafts, something like that. And then my editor, you know what it's like. You
Sounds
write
about right.
the first draft, and then you just repair after that.
Absolutely. It's interesting. Years and years ago, I challenged myself. I wrote a short story where the main character was male. And I was like, okay, can I do this? Can I get into a man's mind and thoughts and create a believable character? So I totally get what you're saying. Like, it's really important to be able to step into their shoes and really think as they do. I'm also working on an episode for the podcast about names, about how we choose character names and things like that. So tell me a little bit about what went into choosing the names for your characters too. Are they based on people you researched, or are they completely fictional? Like, do they have significance or symbolism in any way?
I would love to say that there is some significance to Anna and Svea, but there really isn't. I wanted, I guess, because in many ways they're counterparts to each other. Svea is a victim of the Holocaust, and Anna is a perpetrator. And as the novel progresses, it's very clear that she wraps her arms around evil. So I like the idea that both of these characters had 4 letters to their name. And in some ways they are very similar, but they're very different in other ways. And I guess, the name Svea, there's something gentle about that name, at least to my ear. And I know that as a writer, I also prefer to have characters that don't have long names, just because you got to type them out.
I love that. That's so funny. So I know you did research on Ravensbrück. Did you do any research into the psychology of violence based on gender? Did you learn anything about that? So obviously how it was borne out at Ravensbrück, but is there a difference? Like, I don't know much about it, so I'd love to hear what you've learned about it.
Yeah, and I did quite a bit of research on gender and violence. There was a book that I read, and I think the author is Wendy Lower, but whoever wrote it, it's called Hitler's Furies. And it's about German women that were just incredibly violent. I mean, there were murderers, and they weren't necessarily guards in camps. They were just, wives or girlfriends to high-ranking or even low-ranking SS officers. And there's a bit in the novel where I talk about how I think it's hard for us to sort of imagine women being violent. I mean, it seems like in Western society, at least, that we understand when men are violent. But somehow, if a woman is violent and murderous, there's something even more horrifying about that. And I wonder why that is. So the novel is also an investigation of, why that was the case.
Mhm.
And the female guards at Auschwitz, the Aufseherin, they were not in the SS because the SS was a thoroughly patriarchal organization. Women were not allowed in the SS. So
Mhm.
the Aufseherin, and that word I suppose would be translated as auxiliaries.
Mhm.
They were not a part of the SS. They couldn't wear the death's head, for example,
Mhm.
but yet they were just as murderous as the men that were in the SS. And I mean, it's like a strange curiosity, but the women at Ravensbrück, by and large, were not allowed to carry firearms because
Mm.
pistols were for men, but they did kill with dogs and with
Oh,
truncheons.
oh,
And there's something even worse about that. I don't know why, but it seems more brutalizing and humiliating.
yeah. Yeah. I just wonder what it must be like to be writing these books where I mean, it's really valiant and courageous because I think these stories are super important. But what does it do to your own energy or your own sort of perspective? Like, do you find that you're sort of under a gray cloud when you're writing about these topics? Or, how does it affect you?
I really appreciate this question. I don't talk about it very often, mainly because the story is the story, and I guess it's not about me. But if you have, how do I word this? As a human being, how can I not be affected by
Yeah.
what I study and what I see? And it's been 15 years of being in this darkness, and it does affect me. And I
Mhm.
don't want to be melodramatic about this, but I see things, and it reminds me of the Holocaust. Like, I'm from the Midwest, and if I see a train
Mhm.
going across the prairie,
Mhm.
obviously I think of things, or
Mhm.
I drive by an ethanol plant with smoke coming out. I think about
Mm.
certain things.
Mm.
I'm not a huge baseball fan, but if I see the Yankees and their uniform, it's
Mhm.
striped, I think of certain things.
Mhm.
So I really don't want to be melodramatic, but I
No.
did realize about a year ago when I finished Across the Lake that I need to step back.
Mhm.
And my next book is not about the Holocaust. It's about my home state of Minnesota,
Mhm.
and I get to talk about joyful things. And I think, I give a lot of lectures on the Holocaust all across the nation, so that won't stop. I feel like I understand things about the Holocaust that makes me feel compelled to keep talking about it,
Mhm.
but I don't know when I'm going to write another book about it. I really appreciate this question, Lynn. I don't talk about the effect, I guess, that it's had on me, but I realize that it does.
Yeah. Well, thank you for answering it. I know it's a probing question and I really do appreciate it. And I have a weird question to ask you. I don't
I
know if
love
this
weird
is
questions.
getting into the realm of woo woo or whatever, but like I wonder if you have ever considered like in a former life, do you think you were a righteous Gentile or you were in the Holocaust? Or I don't know if that ever resonated with you. Like, did that ever occur? Or do you think I'm just a wacko asking the
No,
question
no,
now?
I don't think, no, not at all. In fact, I was talking with my wife about this a couple of weeks ago. I'm an absolute nerd for aviation in World War II. I love aviation.
Mhm.
And the B-17 bombers, there's something about, and they're the American bombers that, just helped us win the war, quite frankly.
Mhm.
Without the B-17 bombers, there wouldn't have been a D-Day, for example. And I love England. And if we do believe in past lives, I kind of wonder,
Yeah.
and who knows? I'm very deeply grounded, and I feel very at home talking about World War II. So
Yeah.
maybe, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. We could have that conversation off air at some point because I definitely have my own thoughts. And I think in a former life, I was part of the Holocaust as well. It's very
Yeah,
interesting. But
yeah.
yeah, I think what you're drawn to and what you write about, it comes from somewhere very deep and we don't understand everything. So
No,
you never know. You never know. Well, thank you for indulging me. I really appreciate
no.
that because I know it's a strange question.
No, I don't think it's a strange question at all. I mean, the universe is so mysterious, and it would be a great arrogance on our part to think that we have a lock on this is reality. I'm like,
Right.
I don't know that
Right.
we do.
I totally agree with that. I totally agree with
Yeah.
that. So I have a bigger hard hitting question here. We have seen a lot of hatred grow in our country and around the world. And it seems like themes from the Holocaust, racism, anti-Semitism, a scarcity mentality, fear of the other are alive and well today, which
Yeah.
just shocks me because growing up, I always felt like the Holocaust happened, and we're going to do our best so that it never happens again. And then I see everything that's going on right now. And so I wonder if that could be why, and among many other reasons, a book like this is so important right now. I do think it's a timeless lesson that we should all take account for our basest behaviors. But I also think there's a timeliness, which you, of course, you couldn't have known. You couldn't have, I mean, we've seen this tenor growing, not only in America, but around the world for quite some time. But I wonder what you think the role of a book like this is at a time like this in history.
I hope the book contributes to the conversation about how we need to stand up against fascism. I mean, we talk about autocracy, that there's a movement towards autocracy in America, but I want to call it for what it is, and it's just flat out fascism.
Yeah.
There's open talk of suspending the Constitution. I don't even know how you can do that necessarily, but
yeah.
We have a presidential candidate that has zero respect for democracy. And when it comes to fascism, one of the tenets of fascism, several tenets of fascism, but one is certainly anti-Semitism, fear of the other, and also a degradation of women, this idea that women need to be in the kitchen and, not equal to men. So I'm hoping that this book of mine, Across the Lake, can maybe challenge people to realize that this may have happened this definitely happened in the 1940s, but it's not that long ago. Right. And what separates us from the Germans of 1940 is us being honest with ourselves about the power of hatred.
Yeah. Yeah. I've been talking a lot lately with people about the scarcity mentality versus the abundance mentality. And, feeling like, well, if you get something, then I lose something is the scarcity mentality. And it's such a lie. Everybody can have a good life. Everybody can progress. We can all be prosperous. And it's really perplexing to me how we've gotten here. It's not a political podcast, so we don't have to assess that or come up with answers. But I think that your book comes at a really important time. And I hope it gets into all the right hands, is being read by people who might not know about Ravensbrück and might start to consider about how we are toward one another. It's just, you couldn't have planned a better time, but I think, unfortunately, I hope it can be a path for some people to really take a look at that. So pivoting away from some of the heavy stuff, I know you teach at Augustana University in South Dakota. So how are today's students engaging with words and stories? Are there topics that they're fascinated with? Like, what are we seeing for the future of writing?
Oh, wow. Oh, I really love this question. I'm so energized by my students. They are just whip smart. And if I'm being honest, I mean, they are just more on the ball than I was as an undergraduate. So it's really a joy to step into class here at Augustana and to engage with them. And I think it's safe to say that the majority of my students are very interested in questions of equality, and you were talking about abundance and scarcity. They're very interested in questions of of equality and gender, gay rights, trans rights. There are commentators out there saying that professors like me are, have an agenda. But I'm here to tell you that the students arrive in my class already with, they want to talk about certain things. Yeah. And if anything, over the last 20 years I've been a teacher, if anything, my students have helped me become more progressive and attentive to the issues that are out there. So that's really exciting. And I was really proud of our students because earlier this week we had some propaganda go up by the Patriot Front, which is an anti-Semitic racist group, and they had flyers around campus, and the students rallied against that, and I just was so proud of them.
That's awesome. That's great to hear. I love that. So keep fighting the good fight. I really love that. So, what advice might you offer to aspiring writers who are listening to this episode? What would you tell them about the state of writing today, the state of publishing? What advice can you offer? It's
both easier to get published nowadays and harder if you want to get to one of the bigger presses. But if I am going to offer advice, and I sought out advice when I was beginning as a writer, so if anyone's listening to this and wondering, what they can maybe do better as a writer, is I would encourage beginning writers to see writing as a job. That I don't believe in inspiration. I believe in sitting down and doing the work. And I have a word goal of 750 words a day. And I sit down and I do not get up until I reach those 750 words. Some days are better than others. And maybe you've got the same sort of writing regimen, Lynne.
I do.
Yeah, yeah. I see writing as a very blue collar job. No
Yes.
one, no one asks a carpenter if they're inspired to build a house. You just
Right.
get up and you do it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I would encourage beginning writers to look at it as a job.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think what made the difference for me was committing to 5 days a week. It's the first thing I do. I usually devote several hours to it,
Yeah.
and then I do all my other work and stuff. But that really did create a routine, and it also like fed me. I was like, I couldn't wait to get back to it the next day. So
Yeah.
making it a habit, I think, is super important.
Oh,
Definitely.
I absolutely agree. And so many scenes have, like in Across the Lake, there's one scene that it only happened because I was in the chair. I wouldn't have thought of it if I wasn't in the middle of writing it. And it's a really pivotal scene in
Yes.
the novel. It changes the direction of the whole novel, and I would have missed it if I just, decided not to write that day.
Yeah, yeah, I love it. Well, I'm so glad you decided to write that day and gave us this beautiful book. And so in the show notes, we're going to put all the links to where people can find you, where they can find the book. Any last thoughts before we finish for today, Patrick?
Oh, I'm just so grateful that, you have a lot of people that you could have on the show, and it truly is an honor to come back and to talk about this particular camp, which I think needs more attention.
I'm so glad to give it attention, and it's great to see you again. So thank you for giving me
Thank
your
you.
time. I
Thank
appreciate
you.
it. Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the Make Meaning podcast with Lynne Golodner. You can find us wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. If you like what you've heard, subscribe and share this episode with the meaningful people in your world. And please leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast platform. You can learn more at makemeaning.org or lynnegolodner.com.